Okay. The other thing you mentioned that is like probably the fear of many people getting into their laundromat is not too long after you bought your laundromat, you had a huge $15,000 water leak, right?
Yep.
How long into your ownership was that?
So 7-8 months.
Okay. Now, I mean, and I don't know, stuff like that's happened to me and it feels like a punch in the gut a little bit. I mean, what was that? What was that like? I mean, you're 7-8 months into this thing and things are kind of just cruising along and you get this big thing. You're trying to make a move, right? By retooling partially. And this happens. So what was that like? And how'd you deal with it?
Well, we weren't 100% sure. My water bill had gone up, but I didn't properly associate that it's because I was probably losing water somewhere. So it had been happening for a while and it was under the floor. And then eventually the floor heaved and the tile lifted just slightly. And so my repair guy said, "Hey, I think we got a water leak under there." And so we brought in a plumber and they did the moisture test and they were like, "Yeah." And it was one of my mains to one of my banks of washers. And it was under, and they were like, "We got to demo the floor and go get this." And I said, "What if we cut the pipe and we went over the top instead?" So I had developed a relationship with the distributor for Dexter because I was going to retool. And one of the things we were going to do is instead of going under, we were going to bring the piping from above to feed that bank of washers. And I said, "Is it possible we just cut this line going under, cap it, so there's no more water going under there, call it a loss, and we go up over the top?" And they're like, "Yeah." And they did a great job. And they ran 3 separate drops from that line. The other thing we didn't have was isolation valves. And so then they were able to add isolation valves. They built these great chases going down into the banks of washers. But the price tag just kept going up and up and up. And separate from that, I went back to the Dexter rep and said, "Since I'm doing this, let's rip out all this old PVC from behind here." Cause they were redoing, as they found the water leak, each line past there, they were like, "Hey, and this wasn't built right. Also, this wasn't built right." So this $6,000 repair eventually bled into a 15, and they weren't taking me for a ride. Like that's what reality was. Every time they'd open a new cover to look at the pipes. So what had happened was a discount plumber had come in and put the copper, and instead of sweating the copper to make the valves, they just like almost tap sealed it with a torch. And so when you went to shut off the valve, it just broke in your hand, which it did. It broke in my hand. And so we had to rip it all out and build it right and there was nothing to stop it. What's the term? Hammer?
The water
hammer. Yeah. And so we had to, it was a full upgrade. And then I got a new trough at the same time. So the distributor came behind and we got a custom made trough from here in Colorado and a $15,000 repair. Essentially, that was the end of my credit cards. And I went, okay, all right, I'm done spending. So I got to go cancel this loan. And I had just brought an employee on and I had to let her go at the same time because that was the way I could pay for this. I brought her back shortly after. As quickly as I could, I brought her back. I just said, I can't afford you for this time. I will bring you back as soon as I can. And I did. And she was a really hard worker. She was just the last one I hired. So she was obviously going to be the first one to go in those circumstances.
Yeah, that's brutal. And you know what's double brutal about that is that all that stuff, it's nothing that anyone will ever see. It doesn't add anything. I mean, obviously it adds a lot to your business because you got to have water to those machines for them to work, but nobody will ever see it. So it's all inside the wall stuff. And so, customers aren't going to be like, "Ooh, you got new shiny plumbing back there. Ooh,
and a trough. Wow,
you see what's inside that bulkhead?" Woo. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's brutal. That's a hard hit. And that's why I caution people who, want to get into this business with very little money. You can, but there's risk involved. And if something like that happens 6-7 months into your ownership and it's going to cost you 15 grand and you don't have a way to pay for it, well, that could be the end of your business right there. So just something to be aware of. And again, that's a worst case scenario, but it does happen. This happened to you, Ross Dodds, who was, I think show 9, his burned down, a couple of days after he bought it, stuff happens, right? Like you just gotta be ready for it.